Last year, the Utah Jazz were last in the NBA defensively. Should we expect them to get better? History says maybe not. It's next on Locked On Jazz. Bum 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 bum. Pow.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked On Jazz. It's your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Today, I have gone back for 10 years in the NBA, starting back in 2013-14, and looked at all of the teams that were in the bottom five defensively and what they did for the years that followed. The Jazz last year were 30th. What can we expect out of them defensively this year to get better? Honestly, the historical data is a bit daunting on any major improvement for the Jazz defensively. We'll look at that. We'll look at the teams that did get better and see what they did and what we can learn from them and how long did it take. Plus, a few other notes for you. There's a fun thing going on Jazz Reddit. I'll try to jump on if we have time. I've got some 2K rating stuff. If that's time committed, we'll get to that as well. As I mentioned, I am David Locke. I'm the radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked On Jazz. It's your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. And to the everydayers out there, you're the best. Thank you for making Locked On Jazz and the Locked On Podcast Network what it is today. You've created all this. Thank you so much. All right, today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Game Time. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's Game Time. All right. So I went through 20 years or 10 years of data. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, thank you very much. I will share a screen here, and you can see it. I don't know that it will really help you out a great deal, but just gives you the concept that is here. So you take the bottom five defensive teams in each of the years and then see what they did following. What I was trying to see is, one thing I was trying to find was, how long do you stay bad? And two, who got good? Well, interestingly enough, the model on who got good is the 2014-15 Utah Jazz. The 2014-15 Utah Jazz under Quinn Snyder is the model. They're the team that went from 29th in the league defensively to suddenly being one of the better defensive teams in the league in Quinn Snyder's first year taking over the franchise. So the transition from Ty Corbin to Quinn Snyder is one of the better ones. It also is Rudy Gobert's begins to start and play 37 games a year. And the Jazz go from 29th defensively to 13th to 6th to 3rd to 2nd to 2nd to 2nd. So the number one model on how to improve defensively is our own Utah Jazz when Quinn Snyder takes over for Tyrone Corbin. And in the 14-15 season goes from 29th to 13th and then goes 6th, 3rd, 2nd, 13th, 4th. Okay, that's the model. And so what you have to do that is have one of the five greatest defensive players in the history of the game who's going to go to the Hall of Fame. All right, so that's not a great model. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, you're seeing all these big red lines across the screen. For those of you listening, you can envision the red lines. Well, the red lines are a bit daunting because what the red lines are is, if you look through this, if we only count teams that go in once, so they're in the bottom third, they're in the bottom five, and if they stay there, we don't count them a second time. So in that process, there have been, I'm just recounting my number, I believe it's 19, so we're 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 teams, not counting the last 2 years because we don't have enough data to see where they go. If we did, it would get worse. So 19 teams. Of the 19 teams that were in the bottom five defensively for a season, 12 of the 19 stayed there or thereabouts for at least 3 seasons. 3 seasons. Once you're bad defensively, you're bad defensively. The 13-14 Lakers stayed there for 4. The Timberwolves of 14-15 stayed there for 3 and then 4 out of 6. The Knicks in 14-15 slid out for a minute, but were a bottom 10 defensive team for all but one of the next 6 years. The Sacramento Kings, who were 27th in 14-15, were a bottom 10 defensive team in 7 of the next 9 years. The Nuggets, after 4 years, popped out. We'll look at that 18-19 Nuggets team. It's a little interesting. It took them 4 years to get out of there, but they then got better and went on to win a championship. The Nets were just kind of mediocre for a while, never got good. The Suns were in there for 3 years. The Cavaliers, who are a model we'll look at in a second, were there for 4 years. The Wizards have been there now for 6 years. The Hawks have been there for 6 years. The Blazers have been there for 5 years. The Pacers have been there for 3 years. So of the 19 teams that we have in here, and if you count the Spurs and Pistons of the last 2 years, of the 21 teams, 14 of the 21 stay bad for at least 3 years. And really more than that, the Lakers do it for 4, the Timberwolves do it for 4, the Knicks do it for more than 4, the Kings do it for 4, the Nuggets do it for 4, the Cavaliers do it for 4, the Wizards, the Hawks, the Blazers. So really, when you get down to it, 8 of the 19 stay for 4 or more years. So if the Utah Jazz buck out of this trend, they're doing something very unusual. That's the biggest takeaway I have from doing this research on bottom 10 defensive teams is once you're bad for a long time. 12 of the 19 teams who entered into the bottom 5 defensively stayed there for at least 3 years. 8 of the 19 teams stayed there for at least 5 years. Almost half, were bad for almost 5 years. 2/3 were bad for at least in the bottom 5 defensively for at least 3 years. So I know the Jazz coaching staff is putting a huge emphasis on this, and it's the number one thing they're talking about is how we get better defensively. But honestly, the data says it's a lot more than it is, way more than any functional change. It is a personnel or coaching change that have changed which teams are able to get better. We have 7 or 8 of them we can look at and say, all right, what did they do? We just showed you one of them, which ironically enough is us. Our Utah Jazz under Quinn Snyder, coaching changing Tyrone Corbin to Quinn Snyder and Rudy Gobert. Let's be honest, Rudy Gobert, all credit to Quinn for his defense, but Rudy Gobert. So what did the other teams do? What can we learn from the Cleveland Cavaliers recently? What can we learn from the Orlando Magic recently? What can we learn from the Houston Rockets recently? What can we learn from the Lakers after 6 years of falling apart? Maybe the most important model for us. We'll look at all of those as we continue here on today's edition of Locked on Jazz. Thank you very much for tuning into Locked on Jazz today. Today's show is brought to you by my friends over at Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross and in Logan. The Chevy lineup of trucks, unprecedented. The Silverado and the Colorado. The Silverado is the big king poobah of them all. You're sitting up there, you're driving, you're feeling like you're in a lazy boy chair. You got all the power in the world behind you. You're riding above the road. You're just feeling good in that Silverado truck over at Chevy. The Colorado is the smaller, zippier, functional, fun truck to have. That's what makes Chevy, and Chevy's got amazing deals coming for you. As we get closer to the winter, maybe it's time to step up. Is it time to step up to the new SUVs with the Blazer and the Trailblazer? Or it's the Suburban and the Tahoe? It is the Utah County assault vehicles we know so well. The 2024 Silverado right now has $10,000 off. And one of those SUVs, the Equinox 2024, is $369 per month. So amazing deals over at our friends at Murdoch Chevy in Woods Cross and in Logan. If you're going to stop by, please send me an email at dlock09@gmail.com so that I can get you that VIP meeting. Today's show is also brought to you by Game Time. Oh, I was watching Game Time the other day for the train tickets at USANA, or I guess it's not USANA anymore. It's called something else. Always watching Game Time for those last-minute tickets. Going to be all over Game Time for hockey tickets this year here in Utah, so I can get to go to some games. Game Time is the app to use for the last-minute ticket deals. All-in pricing toggle feature means you have no surprises at check-in. Seat views give you the panoramic view of your seat in your app. It saved me this year. I wanted to go to see Red Hot Chili's. It was a price for a ticket that was really good. I was all fired up, and then I went and hit the thing, and you know what? It was an obstructed view seat. And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't been using Game Time. I also got the lowest price guarantee, credit for $110 of the difference, and Game Time ticket coverage. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets and use Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA. Will give you $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first ticket. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. Cannot thank you enough. All right, NBA fans, we continue with Locked On NBA every single day in the offseason, so it's always there for you. A lot of people were listening last week. Number two, if you're an NFL fan, Locked On NFL is now 2 shows a day. Tony Wiggins, the barbershop in the afternoon, and Tyler Rowland, the madman, leads it off every morning with all his energy and pizzazz. So both those shows up and there for you. A lot of fun going on with that. All right. So what teams actually got better? There's some interesting little weird ones in here. Let's address the first really strange one that makes you kind of go, huh? And when I started my research last night on this, I was like really confused. And that is the 13-14 Milwaukee Bucks. So the 2013-14 Milwaukee Bucks are coached by Larry Drew, and they are terrible. They go 15 and 67, and they are 29th in the league defensively. And Jason Kidd takes over, and they go to 3rd defensively the very next season. Now, it's the beginning of Giannis. Giannis plays 81 games and starts 71. So you begin, that's kind of the big things. The 20-year-old Giannis Antetokounmpo checks in. So our first 2 sample sizes are that you get Rudy Gobert on the Jazz, and you get Giannis on the Bucks. Okay, yeah, this is drafting or getting lucky or finding that guy. What's weird about the Bucks is the next 3 years they were bad. They went to 22, 18, and 18, regressed back to not being very good before Mike Budenholzer takes over the team in the 18-19 season. And then in the 18-19 season, when Mike Budenholzer takes over, they go from 18-1. So we do see, frankly, in our first 3 samples, that there's a coaching change that takes place also. Okay, that's actually a reoccurring theme here, but I'm not sure. I think it's personnel-based as much as anything. Okay, let's look at the Lakers. This one's really maybe the most interesting to me of all. If we start with and I hate to use the Lakers ever as an example, but if we start with the 13-14 Los Angeles Lakers, they were 28th in the league defensively. Mike D'Antoni gets fired. Okay. They're then in the 14-15 season under Byron Scott. They're 29th defensively. Then they're 30th in the league defensively under Byron Scott, and he gets fired. And then the 16-17 season under Luke Walton, they're again 30th in the league defensively. They're terrible. And this team at this point is Jordan Clarkson, Julius Randle, Brandon Ingram, D'Angelo Russell, are their 4 primary guys, 24, 22, 19, and 20. So there's something to be said on age on these primary players. The next year, they go to 12th defensively. Luke Walton. Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is acquired, Kyle Kuzma, and Julius Randle. Clarkson's minutes diminish. They add Brook Lopez at center as a free agent. So maybe the biggest thing they did is they added a center in Brook Lopez, who plays 23 minutes a night. They also added Kentavious Caldwell-Pope with some defensive personnel, and they added Lonzo Ball as a rookie point guard, who it's hard to believe as a rookie might have been good defensively, but might have been. And they added Josh Hart along the way. So that's a personnel change, and it is getting a big, huge center in the middle that plays center in Brook Lopez for 23 minutes a night. And they go from 12th 30th, from 30th in the league to 12th. That's one of the biggest jumps that you'll see, the 16-17 to the 17-18 season under Luke, and particularly with the same head coach. There is not a bigger jump by any team on this data in 1 year than what happened that year. And that is they switched from their center was Timothy Mozgov, ouch, to Brook Lopez. Their point guard went from D'Angelo Russell to Lonzo Ball, and their shooting guard went from Jordan Clarkson to Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. So they changed 3 of their 5 primary starters, and they end up with a personnel that's way better than it was before. So that one's really interesting. That one you can see the Jazz emulating a little bit over time here. This is the late, but it took 4 years. They were under 4 different coaches. They were just awful. The Philadelphia 76ers were 26th in the league in 13-14, and they jumped pretty quickly to being a half-decent defensive team in 13-14, and that is because they're playing the process and they just decide to defend. They takes them 3 years, and then they get Joel Embiid, and they go from 16th to 4th to 14th to 8th to 2nd. So now we have Giannis, we have Gobert, we have Embiid, we have a little bit of Brook Lopez. Like the big man in the middle really matters. The big man in the middle really, really, really matters. Not earth-shattering, but interesting. Timberwolves never get out of it. Knicks never get out of it. Kings never get out of it, like seemingly forever. Let's get to Denver, because Denver's an interesting one. So the Denver Nuggets were the 26th ranked defensive team in 14-15. Brian Shaw's the head coach. He gets fired. Mike Malone takes over in 15-16 season, and they are 23rd. In the 16-17 season, they're 29th. In the 17th-18th season, they're 26th. So what changed from the 17th-18th season? They're playing Gary Harris, Will Barton, Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Wilson Chandler, Paul Millsap. They have traded Yusuf Nurkic by this point. Their previous year, when they were 29th in the league defensively, they were playing Danilo Gallinari, Nikola Jokic, Yusuf Nurkic, and a bunch of players. So they've gotten rid of that. So what happens between 17-18 when the Nuggets are 26 in the league and in 18-19 where they go to 9th in the league or 10th? It's one of, again, the Laker jump was 18 slots. This one's 16. You don't see this very often. And they really change almost nothing unless their guys just got older and smarter. So their team becomes Murray, Jokic, Harris, Barton, Millsap, right? So that's their team. They were pretty healthy. They started that group generally the whole time. Torrey Craig played a little bit of starting. He and Will Barton kind of bounced around when Barton came off the bench. But their team is generally guard line of Jamal Murray and Gary Harris, Will Barton, Paul Millsap, and Nikola Jokic. Their previous year team was generally Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, Will Barton, Paul Millsap, and Nikola Jokic with Wilson Chandler spaced in there a little bit. So the only thing can be that Jamal Murray went from 20 to 21 and Gary Harris went from 23 to 24 and Nikola Jokic went from 22 to 23. But this one's really interesting and worth looking into because this might be one of the few scheme changes that exists. And I have some friends who are on that staff, and I'm going to make some phone calls and see if I can find out. But that is one, if I were the Utah Jazz, I would really study the Denver Nuggets transition from 17-18 to 18-19 and what they did. Because that somehow changed. And when it changed, it worked. There are 3 other teams to look at as models for us as well. The Phoenix Suns, which I think is just going to be a Chris Paul check. We'll show it to you. But there are 2 recent teams to look at. 3 recent teams to look at are the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Houston Rockets, and the Orlando Magic. In fact, what Jamal Mosley is doing in Orlando very well may be the model for the Utah Jazz, and we'll look at that next when we continue here on Locked On Jazz. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Convenient, flexible, online therapy. Visit BetterHelp.com youtube.com/LockedOnNBA. I like to talk about therapy as something that I would call performance enhancing. Are there areas in which you're not performing well, where your brain is getting in your way, where your mindset is getting in your way, where your past is getting in your way, and preventing you from being the best human you can be? We lift in the gym to get stronger. We do cardio so we can live more healthy life. We do all these various things so that we can improve. And that's the same thing with therapy. So when you think about therapy, think about just improving yourself. It's entirely, and with BetterHelp, you can have it entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. So if the idea is, well, I don't have time, we can probably push that one off the list. I can't find a therapist. Well, we can solve that for you with BetterHelp as well. Fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Improve performance enhancing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen today. It's Jazz. You want Jazz? We got Jazz. You tune in. We talk Jazz. That's what we got for you here every single day on Locked On Jazz. All right, let's go to those teams that are our model. By the way, the Phoenix Suns are a weird one. They kind of fit some of the same things we've talked about with some coaching changes, and then they end up getting CP3, and they end up becoming good defensively. That's, that one I think you can put the Phoenix Suns transition from 30th to 29th to 17th to 9th to 3rd to 7th pretty much into the bucket of both Earl Watson gets fired, Igor Shikashkov takes over in the 18-19 season, they're 29th, and then Monty Williams. You have coaching change and then to get them to 17th, and you have personnel change with Chris Paul to get them to 9th. Okay. Let's look at Orlando, because I think this one is the one that gives us the most hope as a Jazz fan. So Jamal Mosley, who took over, is now in his 4th year. This is without a coaching change, which I don't think we're getting here in Utah, nor should we. Let me be clear on that. And they go from Jamal Mosley's first year in 21-22, previous year under Steve Clifford, they're 26th in the league. So Jamal Mosley takes over and gets them to 17th in their first year. And then Jamal Mosley gets them from 17th to 16th. And then he gets them from 16th to 2nd. And what's interesting is Mosley's done this without a lot of personnel change. He's really done this with development of style and play. So if you look at them right now, they're Jalen Suggs with Gary Harris, Franz Wagner, Paulo Banchero, and Wendell Carter. They're young. They have 4 guys, 24 or younger, and they're good defensively. That defies the NBA. We all think about youth and athleticism, but frankly, usually youth's bad defensively. The previous year, when they were 16th defensively, who were they? They were Gary Harris, Markelle Fultz, Wendell Carter, Franz Wagner, Paulo Banchero. So only change was Jalen Suggs, who's a superb defensive player, moved into the lineup with regularity. And they jumped. In the 21-22 season, they were Jalen Suggs, Gary Harris, Wendell Carter, Franz Wagner, and Cole Anthony. Cole Anthony went out. Paulo Banchero's come in over time. Jalen Suggs has held to that position, gotten better. And Jamal Mosley, in his years, has taken them from 17th to 14th to 2nd defensively. And he took over a team that was 26th. Tip of the hat. Tip of the hat. Let's look at what Cleveland did under JB Bickerstaff. Because Cleveland had 4 years of being awful. In 17-18, under Tyronn Lue, they lost in the finals. They were actually terrible defensively. Remember, that's the year they just don't try until. Then Tyronn Lue leaves 6 games into the season. Larry Drew takes over, and again, Larry Drew helms another terrible defensive team. In 1920, they decide to hire Beeline, and it's a disaster, and JB Bickerstaff takes over for 11 games. And then in 2021, Bickerstaff takes over for a full time, and they're 25th in the league defensively. In the 21-22 season with JB Bickerstaff, they draft Evan Mobley and they acquire Jared Allen. They get big. They get big. They have Lauri Markkanen. They have Darius Garland. They have Isaac Okoro. They have Karis LeVert. They really shift to being a defensive team, and they go from 25th to 7th. And the year they were 25th, their roster was Colin Sexton, Darius Garland, Isaac Okoro, Larry Nance, and they have Jared Allen for 40 games that season, and Andre Drummond. So they add Evan Mobley in the draft. Jared Allen becomes their starting center predominantly, and Kevin Love stops playing as much, and they add Karis LeVert, who's long and athletic, and they add Lauri Markkanen, and they become long and they become big, and they go from 7th to the best defensive team in the NBA. It's a pretty interesting little one to look at. And the last one to look at, and then we'll summarize this, is what happened last year in Houston. And that's just a coaching change, personnel change, that Ime Udoka takes over. They add personnel change, Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet. They don't do it with bigs. They do it with effort, energy, standards. They're still super young, and they go to 9th defensively. So let's review this for a second. As we review this for a second, the daunting story is that of the 19 teams that have gone in the bottom 5, 12 of them stay there for at least 3 years, and 8 of them stay there for the last 5, for at least 5. It's hard. Major personnel changes, and they're all height except for the Rockets. Giannis, Gobert, Embiid, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley. Those are big personnel changes. Coaching changes happen a lot in this. Not something that's going to happen with the Utah Jazz. Brook Lopez. Should have mentioned that one. Those are big guys. The two that are most interesting to me are the 17-18 Denver Nuggets to the 18-19 Denver Nuggets, who end up going to win a championship. They're 4 years of being bad defensively. It's 2 years of Michael Malone, or 1 year of Michael Malone. They go from 28-6 to 9th. And the other one is what Jamal Mosley taking over Steve Clifford. They were bad under Steve Clifford. Then Mosley takes over, changes their culture from 17th to 4th to 2nd. And that one's pretty interesting to me as well. The one that's going to be interesting is Victor. Victor's the next one to do the personnel because the Spurs have gone from 30th to 22nd. We'll see where they go next year. But there are really, what's eye-opening to me about this is only maybe in the 17-18 to 18-19 Denver Nuggets season, and maybe only under Jamal Mosley, but that's from his start. Has there been any seemingly been a scheme change in how you play defense that makes you get out of the bottom 5 defensively? It's a personnel change, player or coaching. But I do not find many examples other than the 17-18 Denver Nuggets to the 18-19 Denver Nuggets of a team that had a scheme change that got them better. Phoenix was in the bottom 3 for 3 years. They got Monty Williams. They went from 30th to 17th to 9th to 3rd. Coaching change. Cavaliers got a personnel change. They added Jared Allen, Lauri Markkanen, and Evan Mobley. They got big. The Bucks got a personnel change, 2 of them. Giannis Antetokounmpo, and then when Jason Kidd didn't get him to defend, Mike Budenholzer got them from 18 to 1. That's the biggest jump there is. The Lakers jumped from 30th to 12th under Luke Walton. Is interesting. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Lonzo Ball, and Brook Lopez. But also worth seeing if there was a scheme change. That's impressive. That's the highlight of Luke Walton's coaching career right there. The 76ers go from 26th to 16th to 4th, Joel Embiid. So it's personnel first, more than anything else. It's not scheme. Jazz need to go find the personnel that gets them out of the bottom 5 defensively. That is Locked On Jazz today. Tip of the hat to the guys over at Reddit. They're doing a fun thing about most underrated, most overrated, best, worst, started, fun. Go check it out on NBA Reddit. We'll talk about it tomorrow. We also got the 2K stuff. It is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe or follow. I'm trying to get our subscriber numbers over 50%. So if you're listening right now, hit subscribe. Thanks for being with us. Super appreciate it. If you're on audio, check out the Big 6 and 60. That's our big show of all the national shows. And if you're on video, we'll send you now to the first ever national 24/7 channel on YouTube, Locked On Sports Today.